sometimes the most ordinary days hide the darkest endings. History is filled with crimes that began like everyday moments, but spiraled into unthinkable horror. Behind closed doors and quiet streets, victims met fates more chilling than fiction, reminding us how quickly safety can shatter into tragedy. These cases reveal the horrible fates and darkest twists in crime history. Stay with us till the end, because the last story might just be the darkest twist of them all. In July of 1999, Bowmont, Texas, carried on like any other small city. People finished their shifts, picked up dinner, and headed home to family. Among them was 34-year-old Kimberly Langwell, a devoted mother who had just left work on a warm summer afternoon. Before heading home, she phoned her teenage daughter to say she'd be stopping by to see an old boyfriend. She promised she'd be back in time for dinner. That was the last time anyone heard her voice. Hours later, her car was discovered in the parking lot of a local pharmacy. Inside sat her phone and some of her belongings. Strangely, her keys and purse were nowhere to be found. Investigators combed the area, canvassed witnesses, and followed every lead they could find. But the trail went cold almost instantly. Days turned into weeks, and then into years, with no sign of Kimberly. For her daughter, friends, and co-workers, it was as if she had vanished into thin air. Over time, the case became one of Bowmont's most haunting mysteries. Rumors swirled, but no concrete evidence surfaced. The former boyfriend she mentioned in her last call was questioned but never charged. Without a body, without answers, authorities could do little more than keep the file open. For 25 years, the mystery loomed over the community. Families raised children, entire neighborhoods changed, yet the absence of one woman remained a heavy shadow. And then, in 2024, everything shifted. Police received information from a credible source who claimed Kimberly had been killed on the very night she disappeared, inside the home of the ex-boyfriend she'd gone to visit. According to this account, her remains had been hidden not far away, but on his very property all along. Acting on the tip, investigators obtained a warrant and began a careful search. What they unearthed stunned even the most seasoned officers: human remains buried beneath the surface of the man's residence. Forensic testing confirmed what Kimberly's family had both dreaded and needed to know. After 25 years of unanswered questions, she had finally been found. The man once considered only a figure of interest was arrested and indicted on murder charges. The case's long silence broke wide open. Neighbors who had lived alongside him for decades now realized a dark secret had been concealed just yards from their own homes. Kimberly's daughter, now an adult, finally had the truth about what had happened to her mother. Court proceedings have since moved forward, with prosecutors building their case and defense attorneys fighting to challenge the evidence. Nearly a quarter century after her disappearance, the trial is set to determine accountability in a crime hidden for far too long. What began as the baffling vanishing of a hard-working woman ended with a discovery beneath familiar ground. It is a reminder that sometimes the answers are not lost in distant places. They can be lying just beneath the surface, waiting for the day they can no longer stay buried. But as shocking as Kimberly's discovery was after decades, hers is not the only story that shows how horror can hide in plain sight. Sometimes the danger doesn't stay buried for years. It can be right next door, waiting for the worst possible moment to strike. And when it does, the consequences are just as devastating. If you're following these unbelievable cases closely, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss another story this chilling. In September of 2021, life in the quiet Alberta town of Hinton carried on much like anywhere else. Families filled the small apartment complexes, children played outside, and young parents worked hard to build stable homes. Among them was 24-year-old Mikhail Bush, a young mother who had recently moved into a new unit with her fiancé and their little boy, Noah. At just 16 months old, Noah was discovering the world one step at a time. For Mikhail, the future seemed full of promise. They had lived in the building only a few weeks, excited for a fresh start. They were ordinary neighbors, blending into the rhythm of the community. What they could not have known was that danger waited right across the hall. Their neighbor, Robert Major, was no stranger to police. He carried a disturbing past, one that included violent crimes and offenses against children. But in Canada, that history wasn't public knowledge. McHale and her family had no way of knowing the threat that lived only steps away. On the night of September 16, 2021, that danger became reality. Inside the walls of his apartment, Major launched a brutal attack. McHale was overpowered, assaulted, and strangled when she fought to escape. Forensic investigators later revealed the violence she endured, a nightmare no one could have imagined. Her little boy, Noah, was also silenced. In a desperate and cruel act, Major forced a sock into his mouth and placed a plastic bag over his tiny head before hiding his body in a dumpster behind the building. The innocence of a child's laughter was extinguished in the most chilling way possible. The next day, September 17th, authorities discovered the bodies. McHale was found lifeless inside Major's bathroom. Noah's small frame was discovered outside, discarded like trash. News of the crime swept through Hinton, shattering the sense of safety the town had long held. For the fiancé who had shared dreams of a family and future, the discovery was beyond comprehension. The investigation quickly focused on Robert Major. His record revealed what many considered a systemic failure. Despite warnings from parole officials about his risk to women and children, he had been allowed to live freely in a family-oriented complex. When confronted with overwhelming evidence, Major pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder. But for many, justice did little to erase the anger and disbelief. Why had a man with such a history been allowed to live among unsuspecting families? Why wasn't his presence known to those most at risk? McHale and Noah's deaths raised urgent questions about public safety, registry access, and the protection of vulnerable people. The tragedy stands as a devastating reminder of the hidden dangers that sometimes lurk behind closed doors. What began as the promise of a new chapter for a young mother and her child ended in violence that could have been prevented. Their story is one that continues to echo across Canada, pressing society to confront the balance between privacy, second chances, and the safety of the innocent. It was a cold December afternoon in 1995 when Selene, a 19-year-old French student, decided to cross the English countryside on a brief visit. She had plans, hopes, the usual dreams of university and youth. Her journey was meant to be simple: hitch a lift, reach a destination, visit a friend in Britain. Nothing more ominous than a snapshot holiday in the back of her mind. She pulled off at a service station on the M4 motorway at Chieveley, Berkshire. Tired from her travels, she accepted the offer of a lift from a lorry driver named Stuart William Morgan, a man she had never known before. She spoke, smiled, shared light conversation, and then suddenly, she vanished. She never made it to her friend's house. For days, for weeks, those who knew her waited, clung to hope. Perhaps she was lost. Perhaps she changed her mind. But as the calendar turned, the silence grew louder. Passengers at the services, staff, anyone who saw her last, every lead fizzled into nothing. Her family grieved without answers. The authorities probed every possible angle. Then came a chilling revelation: Selene had been brutally murdered. She was found dead on December 29, 1995, in a layby on the A449 in Worcestershire. The cause: strangulation and blunt force trauma. She had been killed alone in her final hours far from home. The real horror, however, came later. Detectives uncovered that after Morgan had picked up Selene, he kept her body in his lorry's sleeping bunk, used it as a mobile coffin, for up to 10 days. During that time, he continued his route, stopped for rest, carried on as though nothing abnormal was hidden beneath the blankets of steel. Neighbors, service area workers, all oblivious to the weight of death riding just inches behind them. When he finally dumped her remains, there was still no immediate justice. But eventually, Morgan was arrested in February 1996, after a fellow trucker recognized his face from an identikit. Evidence piled up: travel records, discrepancies in his tachograph, which measures journeys, personal items of Selene's found in his cab and at his home. In October of that year, Morgan was convicted of her murder. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment, with a recommendation of at least 20 years before parole eligibility. Multiple appeals followed, but the sentence stood. As of recent reports, attempts for release have been denied. On the surface, it seemed like a simple missing person case, a young woman who missed her appointment, who simply disappeared. But beneath that calm was a twisted betrayal. Someone she trusted for hospitality's sake turned a moment of kindness into a long nightmare. The case of Selene Figar endures as a sorrowful mark on holiday highways, reminders of the dangers that sometimes hide in plain sight. It isn't only about murder, it's about trust betrayed, silence sustained, and a life lost in the belly of a cold, rolling machine. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon. You won't want to miss the shocking stories we have coming next.